The South Korean presidential election has entered its decisive phase, with less than 10 days remaining until the final polling day. Lee Jae-myung currently holds a commanding lead in approval ratings, but the race still contains numerous variables, making it highly possible that his opponent could emerge victorious. At a critical moment, the Trump administration suddenly took action, and China was innocently involved. Who will win the final victory in this election? In the latest round of televised debates among the three presidential candidates, Kim Moon-ju of the National Power Party and Lee Jun-hee of the New Reform Party temporarily joined forces to launch a fierce offensive against Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party of Korea. After the debate, a Gallup Korea poll showed that Lee Jae-myung's approval rating stood at 45%, a drop of 6 percentage points from the previous week. His main rival, Kim Moon-ju, saw a 7 percentage point increase to 36%, while the third candidate, Lee Jun-hee, remained at approximately 10%. Although Lee Jae-myung, as the frontrunner, still maintains a lead in the polls, this does not guarantee he will be the ultimate winner. In the recent period, the situation of the South Korean election has suddenly become tense. All parties have been involved, either actively or passively, which has become an uncertain factor affecting the election result. On May 23, U.S. media reported that Trump was preparing to withdraw about 4,500 U.S. troops from South Korea. The South Korean side expressed shock and concern because the U.S. had not informed South Korea before making the decision. Later, the U.S. Department of Defense came out to refute the rumor, claiming that there was no plan to withdraw troops from South Korea. In fact, it is Trump's intention to demand the withdrawal of U.S. troops from South Korea. Just this week, the U.S. and South Korea held negotiations specifically on the issue of the cost of stationing troops. The U.S. side asked South Korea to increase the funds it bears for the U.S. troops in South Korea by 5 times. South Korea refused this request, and then Trump proposed to withdraw the troops. The U.S. and South Korea have signed a 5-year housing cost sharing agreement. South Korea bears about $1.19 billion in costs each year. However, Trump is not satisfied with this figure. He believes that the U.S. has provided a large amount of support to South Korea, including military support, while South Korea has imposed high tariffs on U.S. goods. Therefore, Trump is putting pressure on South Korea in both the aspects of stationing troops and tariffs. Regarding the U.S. troops in South Korea, South Koreans have always shown a reluctant attitude verbally, but actually they want the troops to stay. Currently, there are 28,500 U.S. troops stationed in South Korea. This force has provided South Koreans with a great sense of security and serves as a symbol of the U.S. South Korea military alliance. Many South Koreans believe that if the U.S. troops were to withdraw, the South Korean military would face direct pressure from the North, a scenario of losing paternal protection that they cannot fathom. Therefore, when Trump proposed the idea of withdrawing troops, South Koreans began to worry that the U.S. South Korea alliance might change, and this sentiment is likely to influence the current election. Among the three candidates, Kim Moon-ju advocates strengthening the U.S. South Korea alliance. He believes that South Korea should, promptly, reach a tariff agreement with the U.S. to maintain a high level of mutual trust, and has stated that if elected, he will immediately hold a U.S. South Korea summit. His position may gain recognition and support from the U.S., which could help secure more benefits in subsequent tariff and military expenditure negotiations. It is worth noting that Kim Moon-ju is a staunch supporter of Yoon Suk-yeol, having consistently defended Yoon during last year's martial law farce and the subsequent series of controversies. In this context, Kim Moon-ju can indeed be seen as the political heir to Yoon Suk-yeol's legacy. Currently, Yoon Suk-yeol is undergoing criminal trial on charges of inciting civil unrest, and during a recent court session, he denied all allegations. Moreover, his hardcore supporters are influencing the election outcome in various ways. According to media reports, anti-China sentiment in South Korea has recently surged significantly. A number of far-right groups have been staging protests near Chinese communities in Seoul and other cities, waving American flags and shouting slogans like "Go back to China." Even passers-by speaking Chinese have been harassed, leading some to wonder if South Korea is still truly South Korea. Currently, these verbal protests have not yet escalated into violent conflicts. However, if anti-China behavior is allowed to go unchecked, the consequences could be quite severe. The United Nations has directly warned that the anti-China sentiment in South Korea is a cause for concern. The origins of this anti-China wave can be traced back to the conservative faction led by Yoon Suk-yeol. During his trial for failed martial law attempts, he fabricated a rumor in court that the U.S. military station in South Korea had arrested 99 Chinese spies. His supporters also claimed that the password for South Korea's election server was linked to China's government hotline. Although the U.S. forces in South Korea and relevant authorities promptly debunked these rumors, fueled by those with ulterior motives, anti-China incidents still broke out in South Korea. That the conservative faction fabricated such shoddy lies resembles U.S. elections, where China is brought up in every cycle. South Korea's actions serve two purposes. First, to divert public attention from domestic conflicts and shift the blame for the martial law fiasco onto China. The other purpose is directly aimed at Lee Jae-myung, the candidate of the Democratic Party. Compared with Kim Moon-ju, who is extremely pro-American, Lee Jae-myung is a relatively pragmatic centrist. On China-South Korea relations, he believes that maintaining communication and cooperation with China is of vital importance to South Korea. He argues that intervening in the Taiwan Strait issue or taking sides between the U.S. and China is contrary to South Korea's interests. However, this stance centered on South Korea's interests has drawn criticism from opponents. Lee Jun-hee has accused him of having obvious pro-China tendencies, while Kim Moon-ju has called this a dangerous signal. It is clear that the two candidates trailing in the polls are attempting to use China-related issues to undermine Lee Jae-myung's lead. If anti-China sentiment in South Korean society is not curbed and is deliberately amplified, Lee Jae-myung, who holds a relatively pro-China stance, will definitely see his approval rating affected. As support rates rise and fall, Kim Moon-ju may stage an upset victory, while Yoon Suk-yeol is also seizing this opportunity for a final gamble. If Kim Moon-ju wins and becomes the next president, he could use his authority to pardon Yoon Suk-yeol and Kim Gun-hee. Therefore, this South Korean presidential election, which is clearly a chaotic infighting among internal forces, has unjustly dragged China into the fray. The ultimate damage will extend beyond China-South Korea relations. This kind of malicious political manipulation, which disregards facts and implicates innocent parties for self-interest, is truly disgraceful. Ridiculously, while South Koreans spend over $1 billion annually to sustain U.S. military presence, they still do not possess wartime operational control. U.S. soldiers act with impunity on South Korean soil, yet no South Korean dares to stand up and protest. The fact is that China has been South Korea's largest trading partner for consecutive years, with bilateral trade exceeding $300 billion in 2024. Even kimchi, a staple food in South Korea, relies on imports from China, and its semiconductor industry is highly dependent on the Chinese market. Yet they have never expressed gratitude. In my view, Lee Jae-myung should be the most suitable candidate in this South Korean presidential election. He possesses both ability and political acumen, with considerable governing experience. Unlike clowns like Yoon Suk-yeol, he will not excessively cozy up to the U.S. and Japan, thereby preserving at least the national dignity that should be upheld. Additionally, Lee Jae-myung also intends to promote denuclearization on the Korean peninsula and even aims to credit this achievement to Trump, specifically by supporting him for the Nobel Peace Prize, which is a significant temptation for Trump. However, it will not be easy for Lee Jae-myung to win comfortably. If Kim Moon-ju persuades Lee Jun-hee to withdraw from the race and secures the support of those voters, the National Power Party could rival the Democratic Party and even surpass it in popularity. Although Lee Jun-hee of the Reform New Party has stated that he will not withdraw from the race and will persist until the end, in my view, this is merely a ploy to drive a harder bargain. For Yoon Suk-yeol and his conservative faction to win, they can only seek to woo Lee Jun-hee, as this represents their only chance of victory. However, having survived multiple assassination attempts and trials to reach where he is today, Lee Jae-myung is by no means an ordinary figure. It is likely that Yoon Suk-yeol's faction will find it extremely difficult to make a comeback this time.